Toastmasters and guests, please welcome Peter Varju with his speech entitled Warrior or Builder. Warrior or Builder, Peter Varju.
Tonight I would like to talk to you about one of the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt, Ramses II. His name officially stands for the offspring of Ra, or the sun god. Ramses II was born in around 1303 BC. He ascended the throne of Egypt when he was in his early 20s. Throughout his life, he had numerous wives, some of them who were closely related to him, and about 111 sons, and 51 daughters. He came from a it was a very hectic life. He came from a non-noble family, but a family that had a strong military background, and so we can probably gain an understanding of his many military accomplishments. When he first ascended to the throne, he waged numerous campaigns against Libyans, Hittites and Nubians, mainly because in those times, whenever a new pharaoh ascended to the throne, all the other kings from the neighbouring countries wanted to test their power against the new king. So Ramses II was no different. He conducted a lot of campaigns, and one of the major ones being the Battle of Kadesh. Kadesh was an important trading town in what is today Syria, and Ramses wanted to occupy it, to take it away from the Hittites. So there was a big battle, and ultimately Ramses' troops got ambushed, but he managed to find his way out, and eventually the battle ended as a draw. But I think Kevin and I may have learned a few lessons from him, because Ramses II proved to be one of the first masters of political spin or propaganda. The way he told his story when he got home made it sound like he won an outright victory, and all the tombs and the temple walls were decorated with the battle scenes from Kadesh, describing it as an ultimate glory. But the fact remains that he did win. His troops did win over the Hittite troops, even though the Hittite troops had more advanced armoury. But Ramses could not occupy the city of Kadesh. After the Battle of Kadesh, there were numerous other skirmishes and battles with the Hittites, but Ramses eventually came to realise that he did not have the manpower to have a conclusive victory against the Hittites. So, in secret, he began negotiations with the Hittite king. This concluded with probably one of the first peace treaties in history. And the details of this treaty can be found on the walls of Karnak Temple. Also, one of the terms of the treaty was that Ramses married one of the daughters of the Hittite king. Ramses was also a great builder. he built numerous temples and other monuments dedicated to himself and his glory. Some of the main ones were the Ramesseum in Thebes. This was called the House of Ramses, and it was also called the Ministry of Propaganda because it housed a lot of different scribes and priests and other people whose main job was to write and tell about the glory of the ruler Ramses II. It was also intended to be a mortuary for the king, but as it turned out, his body wasn't buried there. Another major building project was an entire city called Ramses in the Nile Delta. The main object of the building of this city was to keep an eye on the Hittites to make sure that they didn't attack Egypt suddenly. And there were a lot of armaments. It was basically like a military complex because there were a lot of armaments and munitions factories where they were churning out chariots and other weapons for use in warfare. The city of Ramses also has biblical connections because in the Bible the site is mentioned in the story of the Israelites and how it was one of the places where they were doing slave labour for the Egyptians. The third major building project was Abu Simbel in what is now close to the Sudanese border. Abu Simbel was to commemorate the Battle of Kadesh and his chief wife Nefertari, who didn't survive till the end of the building of the temple. It consists of two great parts: the Great Temple dedicated to Ramses, and the small temple dedicated to Nefertari. And there are various statues of Nefertari, Ramses, and their children, and also scenes where they are worshipping gods and battle scenes from the early years of Ramses. And one of the interesting stories about Abu Simbel is that the original monument had to be moved because when they were building the Aswan Dam and the Nasser Lake in the 1960s, they had to cut the original temple into big slabs and move it about 200 metres from the shores of Lake Nasser and to about a height of about 65 metres so that it wouldn't be damaged by the water. And Abu Simbel remains one of the main tourist attractions of Egypt today. And Ramses II lived a very long life. In fact, they were getting ready to celebrate his 67th anniversary of his rule when he died, and he actually outlived most of his own children. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings, but in 1974 his mummy was actually taken to Paris for restoration works, and they actually gave the mummy an Egyptian passport with the occupation King deceased. After restoration works, his body was brought back to Egypt and it now is on display in the Egyptian Museum. So this is just a short summary of one of the greatest and most famous Egyptian rulers, Ramses II, and I hope it will inspire you to visit Egypt. containing the map of Egypt and Syria, and also the plans for both temples of Abu Simbel. So if you'll take one and pass it on.